Hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another addition to my One Piece journey. Today we're going to be talking about the Water 7 arc, Part 2. The conclusion of the Water 7 arc as it goes into the Enies Lobby arc. An amazing conclusion to the arc, an amazing conclusion to the amazing introduction or first half of the arc. Water 7 is fantastic. But before we talk about it in earnest and fully, just to let you know, if you want early access to the next video, which will be a review of Enies Lobby, which I know is a highly anticipated one as well, you can do that by subscribing to my Patreon under the $5 tier. That'll grant you early access. You can watch it right after you watch this one. You can also follow my Twitch to watch me read every single chapter live for the first time, and join in the chat, and join in the jokes and memes and tears and laughs and everything. It's been fantastic lately. Thank you guys so much. You can also join the Discord server for Twitch schedule changes. People ask me out all the time about changes to the schedule in general. Everything about my streams is going to be on there. So I would highly recommend joining that. With all that out of the way though, let's get to the AJP's comments before talking about the arc, or the second half of the arc. Just a reminder, these AJP's comments were for the Long Ring Long Land G8 and Movie 6 video, which I didn't expect many people to comment much on at all, so thank you for these anyway. The first one's from Bobby Zamora, who asks, if you had to pick one scene or moment in the series so far that encapsulates One Piece, or a top 3, which would you pick? Very difficult, but I think I can come up with 3. I won't be able to come up with 1. The first would be the Alabasta moment, the arms up to show to Vivi that they'll always have this inseparable bond. It's just so wonderful. It says so much about this found family and the bond they shared and the kinship they had together and how they progressed. And I think it says a lot and encapsulates a lot about One Piece's journey and the connections between the characters and the Straw Hats, because Vivi is still a Straw Hat. And it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me emotionally. You guys know how I feel about Vivi, and also I just think it's totally representative of the spirit of One Piece and the connections that are formed and the bonds, which I think is so ingrained into this journey. The second would be actually from the Skypiea arc, which would be the scene where all of the Straw Hats are dancing with the wolves, and that gets repeated visually. Throughout there's a flashback with Noland, and then at the end of the arc as well. But that sort of image is a moment that I think represents so much about the optimistic, idealistic spirit of One Piece and what Oda's trying to get across, and what he kind of got across with Skypiea as a whole. And then the third moment, or scene or whatever, would be kind of piggybacking onto that one, which would be the end of Skypiea. Luffy ringing the bell, an advocation for dreams all throughout the land as he proves to those dreamers that it is okay to dream, and it is worth it, all that stuff. I just think, for all the reasons I've talked about in my Skypiea video, it is just everything when it comes to One Piece. That spirit, what it means to pursue these dreams. I think it's beautiful. Kirby HM says the tides going out on the island is a reference to the Aqua Laguna we see later in Water 7, so that was on Long Ring Long Land, the tides going out. The fact that the path is blocked for Tonjit signals that the water is rising again and that the wave will hit soon. Also, Akio Otsuka voices Blackbeard. Give his Jaya Dream speech a watch. He gives that character so much life and makes it impossible to read his lines without that voice in your head. Yeah, I've seen the Jaya speech, just the scene, not the episode. Wonderful. Like I said before, he's one of my favorite voice actors. But thank you for the suggestion, because if I hadn't, I definitely would have appreciated being told about that in the first place. And that's just a really interesting bit of info, bit of foresight from Oda, and bit of interconnectedness within the world, which we know he's really, really good at. The fact that the tide that we see in Long Ring Long Land ends up being a precursor to what happens with the Aqua Laguna in Water 7, which is nearby enough for that to affect it. Really cool. I didn't even think of that. No one pointed it out to me until this moment, so thank you so much. I love seeing these little interconnected details that makes the One Piece world and setting feel so much more organic and rich than it would otherwise. Then one from A3 Radio, who says, I'm sure this information is already somewhere in the comments, but I couldn't find it. With regards to the afro, there was an extremely popular Japanese boxer during the 70s and 80s in Japan called Yoko Gushinkin, who famously had an afro and a handlebar mustache, and it's portrayed in media using similar mannerisms as Afro Luffy. I believe he successfully defended the world title in his weight class for 13 times, making him the most successful Japanese world title defender, and only has one international loss, after which he retired with a record like 20+1, adding more to his legend. His charismatic personality also kept him working on TV after retirement. He's very idolized, especially by Oda's generation, and it's a relatively common gag in manga. If I remember correctly, there's an Afro boxer spirit cameo cameo in Shaman King, and Mr. Satan from Dragon Ball shares the iconic hair and handlebar mustache, among many others. Actually, prior to my Long Ring Long Land video, I didn't know that either, so thank you. I again, don't have too much to say about it, with regards to this sort of trivia or background information or historical context for the things that Oda does, but I really appreciate you telling me, and thank you about that. I had no clue whatsoever, and I think things like that are really interesting for adding to the identity of the series in terms of, because this is something that only could have been written by someone from Oda's generation, or in this specific way, or it could have been influenced in this specific way for Oda. So I think it adds even more identity to the series that makes it something that only he could have written even more, if that makes sense. So I like little tidbits like that. Thank you again. Grant Kate says, one of my favorite things in this arc happens when Aokiji attacks Nico Robin with his ice saber, and Zoro is the first crew member to defend her. The first Straw Hat to clash with an admiral, and he does it for Nico Robin. Zoro was always the crew member who trusted her the least when everyone else warmed up to her quickly. After their experiences in Skypiea, Zoro treats Robin like one of the crew. Such a fire moment. I'm gonna talk a bit more about Zoro, but I think he has been so subtly good in an underlying way in the past couple of arcs, from the end of Skypiea up until the end of Water 7 and the beginning of Enies Lobby, in terms of just being this pillar of support, being this person that needs to keep an even keel, be very neutral, unbiased, non-emotional, to then balance with the likes of Luffy and Usopp and things like that, to have the clearest head. He isn't judgmental, he just doesn't trust Robin for very justifiable reasons, I think is fair to say. And he isn't given any reason to properly trust her until these moments, right? So I think the fact that he saves her in that way really speaks a lot through actions rather than words, as Zoro tends to do, right? But then, in addition, his role in Water 7, for reasons I've talked about in the previous Water 7 Part 1 video, and that I'll talk about in this one, his role is so essential because him not being the one to trust Robin, yet being the one who sees things the clearest as a result of that and is nonetheless still fair towards her, is so key to their entire mission going forward and their sort of emotional energy and their spirit as a crew. So yeah, he does a lot of great things, and I guess the precursor to that in Water 7 was what he did in Skypiea. Sorry, in Long Ring Long Land. Then, Clank says, what I adore about the Foxy Pirates is how it expands what a pirate can even be in One Piece. Straw Hats and Red Hair Pirates want to adventure, Black Cat Pirates and Buggy Pirates are your typical treasure-seeking pillagers, Baroque Works, and to a lesser extent Arlong Pirates, was a shadowy crime syndicate, and then you have characters like Bellamy that eschew lofty dreams for taking what you can of the world around you. And then there's the Foxy Pirates. They sail around and challenge other pirates to games that can trade crew and make you lose your flag. The sheer perpendicularity of having this as a primary goal, that this is what they do, is not only hilarious but a hugely enriching piece of world building, an element that invites you to imagine yet unthought of possibilities. So I really like this. Again, it's not one that I entirely agree with in totality, similar to one that I had last video, but it's one that I generally agree with overall. Like, I think the Foxy Pirates, do I think their execution is the most engaging thing in the world? No. Do I find them to be extremely memorable or rich or engaging? I'm not gonna lie to you guys, not really. But they do add to the breadth and scope of the world and the motivations and what pirates can be, and it just reminds you that there are people like this out there, that there's all manners of different sort of motivations for these pirates. And this is something that, the reason I say I don't entirely agree is that I don't think it expands things to that significant an extent, because I think that was kind of established before through just the sheer variety of pirates even prior to Long Ring Long Land. I think Oda adequately established that and showed us the scope of this world and the types of different people that could have all sorts of different motivations, but I think this is a very welcome reminder of the different types of pirates that can sort of manifest in this world, and it progresses or keys you into different ways in which the story could go in terms of direction with regards to antagonist motivations, because his motivations are heinous, among the darkest in the series so far. So yeah, I really like how it expands all that, and yeah, I agree. I think it does quite a decent bit subtextually and in terms of the world, even if it wasn't my favorite thing in the world in execution. And then there are a couple of comments, one from Abo and one from Mr. JVT, both of whom just essentially show their appreciation for the things I said about Long Ring, Long Land, and or show their appreciation and excitement for the upcoming arcs. I just wanted to sort of draw attention to these, and these were selected as for this reason, just to essentially show appreciation for you guys' continued passion and investment in the series. Thank you so much for the support. I hope you continue to enjoy as we get to your favorite arcs. I hope you've enjoyed Water 7 Part 1. I hope you enjoyed this video as well, and the future videos too. Thank you so much for the support. I honestly wouldn't continue doing this if I didn't think it was worth it, and if I didn't see the enthusiasm that it was being met with. So please continue commenting as much as you want, the AJP's comments, the overall enthusiasm, your thoughts in general, the Twitch streams, everything. Thank you so much, and if you feel so inclined, please keep that up. Obviously, don't force yourself. But yeah, I'm just so glad that you guys continue to enjoy close to 400 chapters in. Thank you for all the support on Patreon, off Patreon, in comments, everything. But that will be all for this video's AJP's comments. Once again, if you'd like your comments to be entered into a pool to be read aloud in another video, in a future video, just use the hashtag AJP's, and I imagine there will be a decent few for this conclusion of Water 7. Now, in terms of overall thoughts on the themes, I said in Water 7 Part 1 that, like most Part 1 videos I've done, I can't make conclusions on some themes, and the funny thing is, I still don't think I can, because Water 7 doesn't really conclude as much as transition into Eni's Lobby. Some people have told me that they think of Eni's Lobby and Water 7 as the same arc. I totally get why, because there really isn't a conclusion thematically, except for maybe a couple of things. So, unfortunately, I won't have any huge conclusions to bring you, and I imagine that'll happen towards the end of Eni's Lobby. Maybe? I don't know. But, yeah, well, I'll still continue to talk about them overall here, as I always do. So once again, this isn't concluded, but there's a lot of musings about the idea of what justice means. We have the CP9 and the government, or the Navy, who essentially enact what they enact and go after Robin and go after these weapons and the poneglyph stuff because they don't believe that power should be in the hands of anyone, and then that is their source of justice. Well, they're also very heinous people as well, but that's the sort of sentiment I'm narrowing in on here. Their sense of justice is to completely cut out any risk of this, no matter the consequences, because in the end, the overall goal of just cutting that out from the world and eliminating the risk is more important than anything, no matter what leads to that, or what they have to do to get to that. So there's different ideas of morality, because we have different ideas of what justice would mean. You know, if we think back to other people in the Navy, Smoker, Tashigi, even our protagonists, their ideas of justice are so entirely different, but I truly believe that CP9 don't have heinous means or heinous motivations at the forefront of their mind. You know, they might have some low-key heinous stuff, but their overall goal, I don't think it's heinous. I think they genuinely believe that they're doing the world a favor, but they're a thematic antithesis, because that leads into our next theme, which is, again, the thing I talked about in Water 7 Part 1, the idea of this devastating power being inherently bad or good, or if it's dependent on the user. The knowledge of the poneglyphs, for instance, or like what happened in Frankie's backstory, his weapons, his ships. There are things that are so powerful that they can be dangerous if wielded incorrectly. Now, does that mean that they should be completely destroyed? Just cut out from the world, or can they be harnessed properly? The CP9 believe that their sense of justice is that that shouldn't exist. Now, a lot of our protagonistic points of view, Tom, Robin, Frankie, tend to think the other way around. That it depends on how you use this power, how you wield it, whether it be Robin's research or knowledge, or Frankie's boats, you know? So it's a really interesting thematic duel there, and I think it's very integrative. And then there's that thing of pride in your work, pride in your passions. Robin and her research, Frankie and his boats and everything. So yeah, that continues here as well. I mentioned it in Water 7 Part 1 because I was talking a little bit about the flashback. That actually happens here, so it's relevant here as well. And then there's also this theme of the burden of a captain again, but in a bit of a different way. Luffy is being taught all sorts of brutal lessons that he's gonna have to take in if he wants to continue his journey. He's taught leadership through Vivi as they journey to the beginning of the Grand Line. And now, here again, he's tested in so many different ways, with Usopp leaving, with Robin leaving. How should he think about his friends? Is his faith, justified? Is his faith in dreams justified? He passed that test for Skypiea. Now for this one, with his friends. How will he emerge from these things? I imagine positively, but how will he take this information in and mature from it? On one hand, you had Iceberg, who criticized him for being reckless. On the other, you had Usopp, for essentially criticized him for not being heartfelt enough, for abandoning him. Again, lots of musings about the burden of leadership and how difficult it is to be a captain. There are more themes of bonds being challenged. There are more themes about the nuances of power and how it should be used, and how leadership should be staples, I guess you could say, thematic staples for the entire series. And the idea of pride. Be proud of yourself. Wield your accomplishments with pride. They're a part of you. Don't feel ashamed of something that you've done if it's something that deserves recognition. Be bold, be steadfast in the face of consequence even. Understand your own personal sense of justice, which connects back to the theme of justice. Have agency, and don't really, if you believe something in your heart about something you've created or about yourself or your goals or whatever, don't allow anything to deter you from that. Affect the world in the way you see fit. So those are a lot of the themes that I get from this arc, and like always, I'll talk about them at greater length and expand upon them with regards to the story moments that brought them about. But interesting again that these are not really conclusive things being said, as much as continuations of Water 7 Part 1, what I talked about before, even though this arc ends for a lot of people. It ends on the wiki. A lot of people generally talk of Water 7 and Enies Lobby as separate, so interesting. And like I said, it gives fuel to the idea that they could be considered the same arc. I'm separating them for the sake of these videos just because it just makes it a lot easier, but I totally get it, because these themes are totally cohesive across arcs. So in terms of the cover story, we have a Baroque Works reunion of sorts that's sort of going on here, organized by Miss Golden Week. We see some familiar faces, we see some faces that we maybe wouldn't expect to see, and this is a sort of situation that I think is going to be really important in terms of main story plot lines down the line. I think this is a cover story that's going to be directly impactful on what happens in a future arc. And there are some faces there that, like I said, you wouldn't really expect to see in a cover story, but it's nonetheless very interesting. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. We also see Broggy and Dory. We see them from Little Island on one of the cover stories, which is really nice. So we start at chapter 350. Kokodo and Chimney are sort of looking at the Aqua Laguna, looking at all that's happening. It's again very atmospheric, very ominous. And Kokodo says something that adds to that nature by saying that Iceberg has been hiding things that are not meant for this world. At the same time, Lucci and the CP9 are looking for Frankie to find the Pluton. And at this point, obviously, Frankie and Usopp are together, and Usopp kind of tells him about all that's transpired with him and the crew. And Frankie empathizes with his loyalty to the ship and thinks it's wonderful, and he starts crying. And it was at this moment where Frankie reminded me a lot of one of my favorite characters in Hunter x Hunter, Knuckle Bine. The sort of rough and tough guy with a heart of gold who's very sympathetic and compassionate and easy to get emotional. This sort of aspect of Frankie showed itself here that I didn't really parse out prior to this, but I liked it a lot. It reminded me exactly of Knuckle, which is a great thing. But then he gives some world building details. He says that Water 7 was once built in the middle of an island. That island has now sunk, and then there's parts of the city that are kind of covered with moss and kind of dilapidated. Those are the ones that are usually submerged. And then the conversation then goes to him talking about Tom, the sea train, Puffing Tom, and Tom's contribution to it. And then in the midst of this, Lucci sort of beats down the Frankie family as he starts looking for Frankie and getting closer and closer. We then get back to Frankie and Usopp, and Frankie tells Usopp that the ship, it's just done. There's no way to salvage it. It's a dead hope. But Usopp just doesn't give up on it. It's a lost cause, but he continuously, in denial, won't give up on it for all the reasons we've said before. The way he attaches himself to it, what it means for him, his own self-worth, the projecting, everything. It's all here, and he continues, and he obviously can't let go because this guy, who he hardly knows, tells him that it's unsalvageable. Now, Frankie says something very interesting. He says that it isn't a ship anymore, and Usopp is horrified, again in denial, kind of spiraling. But then Frankie imparts some wisdom. He says that a ship is something that takes someone from a shore to another shore. When it's unable to do that, it just isn't a ship anymore. It doesn't do what a ship is supposed to do. It is a bunch of planks of wood and some rudders and rope and sails that have sentimental attachment to them. But it isn't a ship, because it can't do what a ship is supposed to do. And if it can't do what a ship is supposed to do, you can't expect it to do what a ship is supposed to do. And I really like that he tells him this here, because it actually reminds me of the reality check that Iceberg gave Luffy about being reckless, and about the fact that the Going Merry is just not functional. Frankie tells Usopp the same thing here, basically, and I find it interesting that the two of them, given their past, impart this same bit of wisdom and knowledge to Luffy and Usopp. Two people who have a similar sort of relationship, who are kind of brothers, in the way that Frankie and Iceberg were. The difference here, though, is that Luffy accepts it, and is mature enough to understand that they have to let go, and Usopp can't. And I'm not saying that Usopp's immature for not accepting it, but he obviously has all those ties to it, and a lot more banking on the ship than I think Luffy did, at least internally. But yeah, so Usopp refuses to listen. And so Frankie, with some tough love, literally begins tearing it apart. Usopp is defending the Going Merry as Frankie literally tears it apart. Very abrupt, very rough way of giving him this reality check, but I mean, I guess he has to learn somehow. I'm not gonna judge him too hard on doing that, but it was pretty. But then you can see the idea behind it, as Frankie just says, "I'm going to force you to see reality, see facts," as he throws him down into the water below the ship, and Usopp looks up and sees the completely damaged keel. It's totally broken. It isn't functioning, and Usopp sees it and closes his eyes in such pain in what is an amazing moment. So sad, and just sums up his mental state at the moment and why he can't accept this. And he closes his eyes to the pain, doesn't want to see reality, literally and metaphorically, and then opens them again, and eventually we see him say that no matter what, I'll keep fixing it, I'll keep doing it, and he just cannot listen. He seems to have closed himself off to the reality of the situation because of his emotions, his pain, his everything, but he then says, "I knew all along, I was just in denial," which is what we said was the case from the start, but he couldn't accept it. And it's interesting that Frankie's the first person he tells this to. I think that's quite significant. And he then starts talking to Frankie about this hammering that he heard on the ship back in Skypiea. I think I mentioned it in the video that at the end of that party in Skypiea, he went out to the boat and heard this hammering from someone. Usopp said that he heard this and thought that maybe it was the incarnation of the ship. And Frankie then, recognizing this, starts describing the appearance of the ghost, which shocks Usopp. And he says that what you saw was a Clawboderman? I don't know the pronunciation, sorry about that. Someone pointed it out to me during the stream. I've forgotten since then. But he explains that this is the legend of a fairy that, of a spirit of a fairy, something like that, that goes onto well cared for ships that are loved, to then present itself to the ship's owners once in a while. It's a legend that's been known to happen, rare, but definitely something that's well known. And it is indeed the ship's incarnation, as Usopp thought. And it can help out, it can be a sort of guardian spirit, and one of the ways in which it can help out is by telling them that danger is on the way. And Frankie says that this is proof that it did it because it cared about you guys. It showed itself in that form, and it incarnated because you guys took good care of it. And I think here he tries to really cheer Usopp up by telling him, you know, its lifespan is over, but it had a hell of a life, and there's nothing to be sad about in that regard. In that way, it's almost just like, just let it rest. It had a great life, but it was only for this portion of time, and it's over, and it had a great time with you, and it's sad, but it's best to move on. And I think this is a great way, great empathetic way of Frankie to get that across to Usopp, and I really enjoyed that. I think it made Frankie a much more sensitive presence. Just really quickly about this chapter, this was 351, there's something that Frankie tells Usopp essentially to be rational about this, and Usopp says, it isn't easy to be rational about something like this. And I love that line. I think it was pointed out to me, I noticed it when I first read it. It's just so great. It is exactly, it's totally true. It isn't easy to be rational about that, for all the reasons we've talked about already, but it also is so encapsulating of One Piece as a story in terms of the heart over head element to it, and it offering this sort of dualism to it, because usually heart over head hasn't been really punished all that much, but here it's shown to be very foolish. It's shown to be foolhardy and reckless, and just, it's not the right, or foolish is the wrong word, but just misguided, I guess. Because Usopp has been incorrect here, consistently. We know it, he knows it, everyone knows it, and it's because he's putting his heart over his head. And so I like that Oda shows that balanced side of it through this. And like with all things, like with a lot of things throughout the series, Oda shows multiple perspectives for the same thing, or the same sort of issue, to show that things are multifaceted. Things should not be looked at from one point of view. Something that could be admirable for Luffy or Usopp can also be foolish. Heart over head can be foolish. But he didn't want to burden the crew with his weakness. He didn't want the symbol of all these things he projects about himself onto it to be gone or abandoned. And he was also just angry at himself and angry at Luffy, or rather lashing out at Luffy for his perceived inadequacy. But then there's a knock at the door, and it is CP9. Usopp says that the knock cannot be his crewmates because they're not crewmates anymore, they're not friends, they wouldn't come back for him. He's wrong. They of course still care for him, they of course still consider him a crewmate, I think. I still consider him a crewmate. He is not gone. I don't care what the story says, he is still part of the crew. This isn't a clean cut, this is just a little stumble. But then Franky does some more really empathetic things here. He says that he offers to take apart the Going Merry with decency and respect, and to make sure that it gets a proper, quote-unquote, I guess, death. Let it be honorable. Which is an interesting contrast to him just tearing it apart earlier. Like I said, a very interesting mix between being sort of some tough love, some being rough around the edges, and genuinely compassionate, genuinely caring and empathetic and sympathetic. And then Usopp says no, because it's like doing nothing for a friend who's on their deathbed. CP9 then comes in and Franky starts fighting them. And then during a little bit of a break in proceedings, where both of them are catching their breath or there's just a break in the fight, Franky kind of asks about Iceberg and Lucci says that he's dead. No. You didn't check that properly, my dude. But Franky is shocked by hearing this proclamation and thinks immediately back to a memory of being handed something, being entrusted with something. Just a very quick flash. And then he's told in the present to hand over the Pluton plans. He refuses to do this, and then they incapacitate him and then kind of look around their surroundings, and they see name tags throughout this building for Cutty Flam, for Tom, for Iceberg, and Franky says that Tom was the greatest shipbuilder in the world and that they need to have respect for this place. And this hideout is where they, years ago, worked and lived together. It's headquarters for their old base, and we see a picture from years in the past, or a panel, I don't remember actually, of Yokozuna, who's much younger, Kokodo, who's much younger, Tom, Iceberg, and Franky. And this is a precursor to the backstory that I have been fiending for Franky, and for Tom, and for just the overall history of all this stuff. Franky tells CP9 that they gotta get out of here, they're desecrating this place, he just wants them the hell out of this place that was his home, or continues to be his home in a way, and they then say there are ways to get the answers out of you that we need. They say that they know that there was a crime done 8 years ago involving him and Tom and Iceberg, and Franky vehemently defends Tom, and he says, how much do you actually know about Water 7? And then this is the cue to head into a flashback 22 years ago. Franky is 12 years old, Iceberg is 16 years old. And from the beginning, you can tell these two are close. They have this friendly rivalry thing going. They can get mad at each other, they can get on each other's nerves, they butt heads, they're very different, but you can tell deep down they care for each other, and they're like some classic siblings. Classic sibling rivalry with all the butting heads and love that comes with that. Iceberg, as you would imagine given the age difference, is the more mature one here, the more responsible one, the one who thinks with a broader perspective, as Franky, the younger one, who's nonetheless a genius, just like basically everyone else here, or at least Tom and Iceberg as well. Franky takes to building these battleships. He'd make these like battleships that were kind of used as a toy or for his means, or what they were essentially used and built and experimented with for fun. And Iceberg would always lecture him about how this is irresponsible, how these things could cause damage, how they could hurt someone. And right here, you can immediately see the precursor to what he said about Robin, about the idea that it doesn't matter who wields these things, who makes them. What matters is that they have the capacity to harm people, and so they should not exist. Interesting that a character who is on our side, who isn't an antagonist at all, is a thematic antithesis in a way. It's really interesting. But we then see Tom and Yokozuna, and Tom is this big burly guy, half fishman I believe he is, and he's just so full of life, so boisterous, such an infectious energy, and such a great personality. He's a leader, but he's passionate and full of life, and he doesn't take life too seriously. And he would build ships, and Kokodo was their secretary. And she explains that Water 7 is actually in a bad place at this point in time. It's because of the isolation here, because of the violent weather all around and the pirates all around, they cannot do trade as easily. It's harder to get inland to then allow cargo to get in or out, and it's just difficult. It's just generally difficult for Water 7 to have imports and exports. And she says unless something changes here, this city is just gonna die. Now that very night, Tom works on a drawing, a blueprint of what he says will be the hope for the city. The hope for Water 7, as Frankie sees him doing this. Now, literally the next day after this is all said, a judicial ship arrives in Water 7 and takes Tom away, and everyone's panicking about this, Frankie, Iceberg, Kokodo, but he says not to worry, don't worry about it, it'll all be okay. And then it's explained in the judicial court that Tom's crime is building a ship that Goldie Rogers used to escape on. So Tom was a big part of the reason that this new age of piracy was ushered in. And for this, he is sentenced to be taken to Enies Lobby to be executed. Now, I had heard this a couple of times already, Enies Lobby, but this is the first time it really dawned on me exactly what it was, the weight of it. We'll get to more of that in a little bit, but this is where I first started experiencing a feeling of dread when I heard that word, or those words. This is when I first started kind of putting it together that Enies Lobby, it may well be the darkest place that we've heard of thus far. So Tom, when he's put on trial, says that he does not regret helping Goldie Roger. It really gives you an idea of the presence of the man and what he's done and how he kind of bands these people around him and has these people believe in him and has these people want to help his dream in a way similar to someone we know who has a D in the middle of his name as well. I'm just saying. But Tom says this, I didn't regret helping him, and Water 7 is dying, so you could use me. He says he has this plan for this sea train that'll help improve trade, improve economics, improve exporting and importing, and ultimately just help Water 7 survive and become this hub. He says this will increase trade, and there are lots of benefits if you let me build this thing. And he kind of implores the judge to listen to him. He gives him this idea, he says, I can really help here. And the judge ends up being a really interesting minor character here. Lots of hesitance. You can tell he isn't just willing to completely give in to the reputation of Enies Lobby and give in to the will of the government. He genuinely seems to have a balanced mindset and understand what he needs to do, what his job is by the letter of the law, the letter of the ones higher up from him, but also seems to take lots of things into account. So the judge was a really respectable minor character who I liked a lot. And he says, okay, I'll allow you to build it as long as after it, you go to Enies Lobby. So he's given a 10-year stay of execution at Water 7 while he builds this ship, or this train, with Frankie and Iceberg and Kokodo and Yokozuna, and then after it's done, he is to go to Enies Lobby, and he agrees to that. Frankie is really upset about this. He can't understand why Tom has to go to Enies Lobby when he hasn't done anything wrong. And Tom, once again, a really soothing presence despite how appearances would seem, or the way he talks would make it seem, a very soothing presence just says, don't worry about it, it'll be okay. Frankie has a bit of a tantrum here. He shows, again, a little bit of immaturity, and Iceberg says to Tom that he hates Frankie when Frankie is out of earshot, and Tom says, don't you dare say that. It's explained here that Frankie was found on this trash heap island. He was found there 2 years ago after being thrown out of his home. He was a homeless person, he didn't have anywhere to go to, and he was just found there. And Tom says, get along. You two are both geniuses, you both have the same spirit, you have this kinship, you have a good heart, and there will come a time where you guys need to get along. And there will come a time where you're both influential shipbuilders, and when that time comes, you gotta have each other's backs. From here, we go to a silent 10-year time skip montage as the sea train is put together by Frankie, Tom, Iceberg, Kokodo, Yokozuna, and you see them in all types of weather, snow, sleet, hail, rain, whatever. they're building it, and you see all the happy times, you see the sad times, you see the struggles, and you see the celebrations, and everything in between. It's beautiful. It's such a beautiful little montage of sorts of building the sea train. It really puts you through their journey, and 10 years later, it's completed. It's a huge success. Iceberg is crying, Frankie's celebrating, there are crowds looking on and clapping and celebrating, and we can see Kiwi and Mozu in the crowd as well, Polly I believe it was as well, and it's an awesome spread, this celebration as the grand opening of the sea train ensues. And this, we were talking about the theme of progression in Skypiea, of Noland, and how it applied to him, and the importance of progression, and all that sort of thing. This is a victory for progression, for science. This spirit of progressing things further and improving society and benefiting humanity from Tom is very similar to Nolan's spirit from Skypiea, so I just thought that was really cool. And this spread is a celebration very much in the same way that Noland was celebrated for his discoveries and his innovations. The sea train ends up working. It becomes essential to Water 7, and while things aren't improved immediately, like it's improved a little bit, but it's very gradual. It doesn't change things, it's not a revolution. And while that happens, Tom is nonetheless very confident that things will turn out okay, that eventually people will be able to rely on this for everything. Everything that he promised people would be able to rely on it for, it'll be used to that extent, and it will transform Water 7. Now, at this moment, they're waiting for the decision about whether Tom will be acquitted or executed, as was originally planned. It's kind of assumed to be a foregone conclusion that Tom will be set free because of this contribution, but ultimately we see that some men are looking for Tom. There is a man named Spandam, the supervisor of Cipher Pole number 5, and as he's introduced, as he's looking for Tom, Frankie, with one of his battleships, or one of his ships, accidentally hits him, and the ripples that set off, oh boy. But he hits Spandam, and once again, Iceberg tells Frankie, he criticizes him, he kind of scolds him. Once again, you have no idea the type of power this thing wields. This is so dangerous in the hands of someone else, or if you can't control it. It could lead to such dangerous consequences. Be careful, like, don't do this, essentially. And it's that theme again. Too dangerous to wield. Should someone wield it? Is power inherently bad if it can hurt people? Or does it depend on the intent of the person who's wielding it? Will Oda make a conclusion about that soon? I know which way he's gonna lean in. I know One Piece, I know it's ultimately gonna be on Frankie's side of things, Tom's side of things. I'm spoiling where we're gonna go in a second with the flashback, so apologies for that. But I wonder in what way that's gonna be concluded. Is it gonna be shown that Robin is, at the end of the day, despite the dangerous knowledge she has, harmless? A harmless girl, caring girl, just inquisitive. Is it going to be achieved through Frankie? Is it going to be achieved through proving the CP9 wrong in one way or another? Or maybe through the stuff we just talked about? We'll see. Now, Spandam has come to Tom to ask for the blueprints of the Pluton. He's looking for the Pluton, he's looking for these blueprints that will allow the wielder to have the greatest power. And, the basis of this is this sense of justice. I must collect these things so that they can't be unleashed in any other way. But not only that, it isn't just preventing them from activating, it is the government, the Navy, must wield them themselves. It isn't enough to just ensure that the wrong person doesn't wield them. No. What's important here is that they wield them. They have all the power. The people in this universe, in this setting, with the power to completely eradicate the world will be them. And Spandam says they need to wield it so that they can bring this ancient time of piracy to an end, this period of piracy. And he says that the 5 elders are convinced, and that's why he's here. Now, Tom lies about the blueprints and he sends Spandam away for the time being, but then he entrusts the blueprints to Iceberg and Frankie, because things are getting dangerous and they cannot fall into the wrong hands, and Tom is being investigated, so he cannot keep them. Now, Iceberg says this is a scary responsibility, but he accepts the duty, and Frankie is excited for this duty. That is an encapsulation of each of them. One of them very hesitant to have this sort of power, the other excited for the prospect, relishing the potential. Just very different types of people here. And then Tom, after handing this to them, says, I want to tell you guys about another of my worries. And then we see him show them the wanted poster of Robin. Little girl Robin, 8 years old, or however old she was. Now, why is that? Why exactly is he afraid of her? Has something to do with O'Hara, that much is clear. Now, like I said, the common consensus on the day of the trial is that Tom will be pardoned. He'll be let go for his contributions to society. But then we see that someone is using Frankie's ships to attack the judicial ship, and it is Spandam. Spandam has wielded Frankie's ships, and he is going to pin this damage on Tom, because these ships come from his headquarters. And this happening right here seems to be proof for what Iceberg says. You cannot have something this powerful just lying around and not be cautious about who can use it, because that is exactly what happens here. Frankie has these weapons that can be very dangerous, and what happens is that an enemy takes them and hurts him in the worst possible way, by condemning his master. And this seems to be proof that these sorts of powerful things cannot exist, no matter what the intent of the wielder, no matter who created them, and no matter for what purpose. But true to Oda, true to what One Piece is, this idea would be counteracted. It would just take a chapter or two. Now, of course, Spandam and his men view using these boats as their means of carrying out justice. You know, the ends justify the means is this horrible thing to do, the ends is making sure that no one can wield this weapon except them. And they will do whatever heinous things they need to do to ensure that happens, because this thing that has such power must be used properly. That's the most charitable way of putting what they're doing here. And I do want to stress that CP9, as cold as they are, as ruthless as they are, as cruel as they are, they don't seem to me to be as outwardly malicious as Spandam. I think there's a clear difference between them and him. But either way, these ships are being used. They're being used to attack the judicial ship. They hurt Tom and Iceberg, and Frankie sees this happen, and it is his worst nightmare come true. He cannot believe his eyes. His creations are being used for such evil. It is horrendous to see. And Iceberg lambasts him for this once again. And we see here, this is essentially the core of his character. Like, this was there before, but this just proved it, reinforced it. This is why he acts the way he does. This is why Robin has to be stopped. This is why these plans are so dangerous, need to be protected no matter what, can't be in the hands of anyone, really, if he had his way. This is why he said what he said about her. Weapons being brought into the world have the power to hurt anyone, and that is not acceptable. And there's a fine line between responsibility and fear, and I think that Iceberg leans towards fear. It's a very mature outlook at times, but at the same time, I think he leans a bit much into fear and ends up being that antithesis and ends up actually having similar hypotheses or philosophies to a lot of our antagonists because of this. And it's interesting how fear is the result of that, or fear is what leads to that. When you look at our crew, they don't have any fear. No fear whatsoever, and that is why they're able to potentially counteract this thematically later down the line. I have no idea, maybe they won't do that, but that's, I think, if they do, their lack of fear could be a big reason why, and their knowledge and empathy. Empathy and kindness is the big thing that separates them from CP9. A lack of fear is a big thing that separates them from Iceberg. Interesting given that he criticized Luffy for his lack of fear, or lack of, perspective, I guess. But back to the flashback, this is horrible what Spandam is doing, because using Frankie's ships means that they will be branded criminals, and Tom will get the responsibility, and Tom will be blamed for it, and he'll be sent to Enies Lobby anyway. And they're all displayed up in front of everyone, and Tom is there, and he's very much hurt. He's mortally wounded, and Iceberg says to Frankie, "I'll never forgive you." And Tom says, "Don't blame him." He says it doesn't hurt, once again trying to comfort them. Such a comforting presence, like I said before. And he says to Frankie, or says to Iceberg about Frankie, don't blame him for this, because ideologically he disagrees with Iceberg, but they do get branded as criminals, they do get paraded in front of everyone, and this is the incident that was referred to by CP9 from 8 years ago. And we can see here that the crowd is easily swayed. They see them and they buy into the hubbub and the hype and the atmosphere, and they blame them for everything. They totally buy into it. And we'll stick a pin in that because that's very important, the way that the crowd is swayed here. And then ultimately when they're about to be sentenced, Frankie says, and he lies, and he says they're not my ships, not taking responsibility for that because it'll maybe save them. But then Tom gets upset and punches him and says that's the one thing you cannot say. And then Frankie goes, what do you mean? I regret it. If I hadn't built these ships, no one would have got hurt. And then Tom says, essentially the main theme here, ships are not inherently good or bad. If you extend that further, power, things that can wield power are not inherently good or bad, and you should have pride in your ship, in your boat, in your creations, and boldly proclaim that it is yours. Ascribe value to these creations given what they accomplish, not what they could do in the worst possible scenario, because the intent is what matters here, the heart. And this is the theme of Tom. This pride, this idea that things are not inherently good or bad, it's the value that's ascribed to it and the intent that's ascribed to it, and to have pride in your creations, in what you do. If you extend that to Robin, be proud of who you are and the amazing ability you have to decipher these things, to the amazing interest you have in the world's secrets. And if something's value, or the complexion of something's value, is dependent on the intent or how it was carried out by its owner or whatever, or creator, the going merry is adventure. It just is. But just coming back to this, Tom just says, be proud of your accomplishments. Be truthful. Say with pride what is yours. Puff out your chest with pride and a boom over the ships you build. Which is interesting because he represents this idea that these things of power are not inherently good or bad as applied to the ship, but he's fearful of Robin, who has this power that he views as inherently bad, I assume. So it's interesting. It's interesting that Tom didn't apply this sort of philosophy to everything. And I think it's a nice, interesting human flaw to the character, because he's very admirable, he's very heroic, he's a great mentor again, one of these really awesome symbols and spearheads that inspire our characters and crewmates. Frankie's going to be a crewmate, he is this for Frankie, just like Zeph, Belmare, just like Hiraluk. But he is shown here to be not applying that logic in the places where it is most applicable, that being Robin, which is interesting, a nice bit of nuance. But then again, we don't know the full story, and he might think that because there's that idea that maybe she shares the ideals with the demons of O'Hara, so we don't know what the demons of O'Hara are. Maybe that will lend some insight into the reasoning behind why he thinks that way. Maybe he has lots of reason to think that way, and maybe that fear is justified. So maybe I'm being a bit too hasty by saying that about Tom. Either way, I'm just talking out loud. But then Tom tells them, Iceberg and Frankie, don't interfere with what's about to happen. Tom realizes then that there is no way he can escape this place, and so partly on Frankie's behalf, he goes a bit berserk. There is no way out of this, so might as well act with your heart. And he punches Spandam, and the crowd quickly shifts even more violently, and they say some very unsavory things. The minute things turn against Tom, they start saying Fishman in a very inflammatory way, very discriminatory way. And he claims full responsibility for all this himself, but then he asks that the crime be taken out and cancelled out due to the invention of the sea train. The judge, again, weighing things, thinking about things, not swayed like the crowd, says, okay, but that means that your original crime of aiding Roger, Goldie Roger, will remain. And that is essentially what Tom was looking for. He says he's proud to have helped him. He is proud to wear this as a badge of honor, metaphorically. And it's that theme of pride again, because what is Tom doing right here? He is wearing the deeds he committed with pride, because that is wholly him, wholly his intent. And there is no reason to apologize for that or hide the truth for that. Just say it proudly. It's his own personal sense of justice, his own agency. He was proud to have helped Roger, he doesn't regret it, he wears it proudly, and that is his sense of justice. So a lot of themes coalescing here. Justice, pride, the idea of inherent power. It's all really good. And Tom says, it's okay. Everything's okay. All that we've done will benefit Water 7, and the city will thrive now, and we've done what we need to do. And no matter what happens to me, the city will get stronger. So this is his dream, and it sets sail. And Kokodo and Yokozuna are watching on, and he says thank you to them for taking care of him. And he asks Frankie and Iceberg to take care of the blueprint. And the judge sentences him to what he says he's going to sentence him to, and he's to go to Eni's lobby. Kokodo then gives some exposition about Eni's lobby, which is terrifying. She says that it's a judicial island in possession by the government, and that no one who's been sentenced to go there has ever left alive. Frankie completely loses it, and he attacks Spandam and completely screws with his face, like he just disfigures his face with his attack. And ultimately, Spandam runs away and is escaping from Frankie, and he gets on the sea train. But Frankie chases him, trying to stop him, and Yokozuna is watching on from the side in a boat as Frankie just says, you know, watch from the side. The train gets closer and closer, and Frankie just ultimately throws away his weapon and decides that he's going to try to stop this train with his own 2 hands. And he thinks back to Tom and how he took him in and took care of him and was like his father, and he gets very emotional and moved and just doesn't want to see this man taken away from him. And then the train hits him and he gets sent flying through the air, and he thinks to himself, just like time seems to stand still, and he thinks to himself that his dream in the end is actually, what he really lands on, is that he wants to create a dream ship. He wants to build this dream amazing ship that will sail to the ends of the earth. He wants to do this with pride, and this is the reason he's alive, or a big reason for why he's alive, taking into account what Tom taught him, to have pride, to not be apologetic or shamed about what you've done, and that these things that wield such power, the intent behind their creation matters, and how they're wielded matters, a primary theme here like we've been talking about. And so Frankie thinks about this and that decides, that's my dream. I want to build this ship and I want to sail it to the ends of the earth. Now, what is our crew in need of? A ship that will sail them to the ends of the earth. What is Frankie now established to have here? A dream to create that ship, to sail it to the ends of the earth. It's improbable, it's larger than life, it's a dream deeply rooted in the inner recesses of his heart, and it totally coalesces with a lot of the goals of the crew and the spirit of what they search for, each individual one and altogether collectively. He is so clearly going to be a crewmate. And it's interesting here that in this flashback, Goldie Roger is kind of looked down upon, or looked at something that needs to be kind of just forced out of the society. It's this age of cynicism at a lot of parts on the Grand Line. You know, Jaya had that age of cynicism nature to it for sure. Right here, the government is trying to snuff that out and try to stop people from dreaming. But there will always be people who will dream, who will follow people like Goldie Roger. Tom is one, Luffy's crew is another, the person being Luffy, and there will always be this spirit. And Tom's sentiment and spirit and ideals, they live on through Frankie and through Iceberg. And so I think back to what Hiruluk says, when does a man die? When he's forgotten. And so Tom will not truly die, not as long as his dreams and his ideals and all that he stands for is carried on through his sons. And his dream has set sail through Frankie, and I think that once Frankie is able to make the first step on his dream by creating this dream ship and potentially sailing with the crew, it'll set sail properly. Also, a couple of really neat but sad details here. We now see why Yokozuna tries to stop the train, and we now see why Kokoro has turned to drink. So Frankie, after this, is declared dead. He is hit by the train and he washes up on Trash Heap Island. And then he starts to rebuild his body because he is a mess. He is all bloodied, he is disfigured, he needs to repair his nose, differing parts of his body, and essentially this is why he becomes a cyborg, because he rebuilds himself using the scrap and bits of technology or whatever, an industry that he finds on this island. And then whilst he was doing this, Iceberg ultimately took up the mantle as the leader of the town, and these two sons, we see totally contrasting fortunes and totally different ways of carrying out the dream of their master, but nonetheless both are totally loyal to him and both continue to think of him, to think with him in mind and live with him in mind. Frankie wants to do him honor by living out this legacy and dream and doing what he told him to do ideologically, whereas Iceberg wants to take care of Water 7 in the way that he does, and he ends up doing a great job. With the caveat of CP9 being under his nose from the start. But then we see 4 years later, which I believe is 4 years prior to the events that we see in the story, Iceberg is nominated as mayor, and Khalifa, who has been there for I guess a year, tells him that someone's come to visit him, and it ends up being Frankie. The situation that we were told about from CP9 where they said they noticed someone who came and they exchanged information, they exchanged something, which is why they started being fishy about Frankie. Now, they meet after so long, and Iceberg says, he still blames him for what happened. He says he can't really let that go. But he tells him, abandon the name Cutty Flam. His name up until now has been Cutty Flam, I've just been calling him Frankie. And just abandon that, become this new person, and live your life. He'll be disconnected and he'll be good and able to live, and all that. But Frankie, while he ends up doing that, he doesn't want to be disconnected in this way. So Iceberg gives Frankie the blueprints that he has, and he tells him to just abandon this place, forget it. You disappear, let the blueprints disappear, and just get out of here. He takes this burden upon himself here, and while it's said in a way that's like, I don't forgive you, and while I think some of that is genuine, there is genuine resentment still there. How could it not be? It's so human for him to still blame him a little bit for the death of someone he loved so much. But nonetheless, he does something quite decent here by taking this all himself and just saying, live your life. Just forget about all this. I'll do it. And then he just says, I'm so glad you're okay. Tears in his eyes. And it's really beautiful because you see what essentially Tom said all that time ago. You guys care about one another. But Frankie just says, I'm not going to leave the island. And he took up residence where he did. He built his family. And Iceberg did what he did. And it led to what we see now. And that is where the flashback ends. It is a fantastic flashback. It's one of the best in the series. I wouldn't say it's the best, but I think it substantiates Frankie a ton. It makes me really, really like him. It adds another sort of mentor character in Tom, just like Belmare, just like Zeph, just like Hiraluk. And it actually does quite a lot for showing us how Water 7 came to be societally, how technologically it came to be this superpower of trade and transport and this port, and how the sea train integrated into that, and how things developed over time. So really nice world building through the flashback, and also I think it does quite a lot for Iceberg. It was really good. It's, like I said, one of the better ones so far in the story. Lots of emotional impact, lots of great themes established, because right here, this is where we properly see that the core of Water 7, and I guess onwards a little bit, will be, or one of the cores will be, this idea of power with regards to intent, and how that links to Robin, how that links to Frankie, how that links to all sorts of things, but particularly in this flashback, Frankie, Tom, and Iceberg, and how it relates to them. Now, back in the present, CP9 says that they'll take Frankie in for his deeds 8 years ago. He'll be branded as a criminal. He'll go to Ennie's lobby. And then the director of CP9 calls them, and we see that this is Spandam. This guy has held on to this petty resentment to Frankie for ages and is carrying this out at this moment, in large part due to just feeling stupid because Frankie made him look like an idiot. And I'm not referring to his face being disfigured. I'm talking about how he just destroyed him, beat him up. And that's the core of its character that I think is really efficiently done here. Spandam is quite interesting, and the core of his character is in this pettiness and bitterness and resentment for all these things just being made to look stupid. That has gnawed at him forever, and he can't take it, and that is the core of why he does a lot of the things he does. He wants to shove things in the face of people he hates, and just prop himself up, and very human. Now, so they're going to take Frankie away, and Usopp kind of stands up to try to stop them at first, but immediately one glance from Lucci is all it takes, and Usopp backs down, which, you know, obviously it's not the heroic thing to do, but this is Usopp. He's not going to stand up to him like Luffy does or Zoro does. He just doesn't have that in him. He is still scared. He is still able to feel fear. That has not changed about him. Maybe in the future, but not yet. And I wouldn't have it any other way at this point in the story. I love that he backed down here, because that's who he is. Anything else would be too big a jump, and it wouldn't be believable. Baby steps. Also, one more detail about the flashback that I forgot to mention is how the government uses these operations to try to posture things and deal with public perception and make things spin in the way they want them to be spun. So for example, for their ends, they pin or give credit to Smoker and Tashigi and their people for the defeat of Croc, even though it was primarily the Straw Hats, because that suited their ends. Here as well, they bury the true nature of history to make it seem like these people did the wrong thing, in large part due to Spandam and some of the higher-ups, but I mean, I think the face of this can be Spandam in this instance. Justice, right? It comes down from the higher-ups for the sake of whatever they believe justice to be, and for making public perception suit their needs. Anyway, in one of the most badass moments for Chopper, he actually rescues Polly and Iceberg from the burning building with a knife and a sword in his mouth. He looks really awesome here, and it's very heroic, and a great Chopper moment. And now the crowd turns again, once again. A little bit of an underlying theme here, the volatility and how flimsy people's opinions can be. With regards to public perception, but the crowd swings again here, and thanks Chopper, and he saved their lives, and they're like, we'll do anything for you, what do you want us to do? They're very easily swayed. CP9 ultimately end up taking Usopp with them as well because he's a member of the Straw Hats, and then they see the Going Merry and they want to decide what to do with it. And they ultimately just toss it down, and down the falls, and Usopp screams. So much pain, you can see just the expressiveness, the illustrations are so good in getting you into his mind and seeing how immense this pain is. And we know it through all these dozens of chapters that we've just gone by, understanding what this means to Usopp. But even still, it hurts so much to see him go through this pain in this moment. It finally comes to fruition, his worst nightmare here. And Frankie has a really interesting response too. He looks on, feeling that pain, being very empathetic, knowing what this ship means to Usopp, and what it means in general, and feeling sad that it's being tossed out as well, despite having just been destroying it a few minutes earlier. There are cold looks from all from CP9, and you see here that they are just cold customers, super tough, super rough around the edges, unemotional, very detached, and Kaku just says, it's done. And it really helps kind of elevate them as this immense threat. Again, very little sentiment. Then we go back with Nami, who has come back, she's okay. Iceberg's okay after being rescued by Chopper, and she talks with him, and she asks, why would Robin say that her dream cannot be achieved with them present, or with her with them? Why does staying with them cause her dream to die? To which Iceberg goes into this explanation. He says that I have the means to awaken the Pluton to create this gigantic weapon that can turn the world upside down and destroy it. And he flashes back to when Robin demanded the blueprints, and he says, you can't have that. He says that he talks about the power it has, and Robin ultimately says that she doesn't want to activate the weapon. She just wants to know history. She just wants to learn about the world. He doesn't care about that. He says that it's dangerous regardless of how you want to use it, again reflecting his flashback and backstory really, really well. Again reflecting that theme. I won't talk about it redundantly, but you guys know what I mean. But you don't need evil intentions to hurt people, as he would know better than anyone aside from maybe Frankie. But then he says something very interesting. He says, you saw the fates of the demons of Ohara, and still you want to chase after history. And then she says, what do you know of Ohara? Again, Ohara. Like, what is going on here? What does it have to do with Robin? What is this tragedy or the demons of Ohara? It's clearly where she's come from. It's clearly the setting where some sort of horrible tragedy takes place, and I think it totally correlates with why she's looked at as this demon as well herself, and why people fear her, and why she's regarded as this witch or whatever. But the specifics are just so tantalizing, and we don't have them. Or I don't have them, you guys do. And she's super upset at him, saying, what do you know about Ohara? Suggesting also that the history that's been stated to be the truth to everyone is not the full story. The demons of Ohara, the way that this place is looked at as this horrible land full of sins or whatever it was, that's not the full story here, is what she's alluding to. She says, what do you know? Which would totally correlate with how the government tried to posture and suit things to their own end and make the image very, very different from the truth, but nonetheless one that suits them themselves. For instance, like I said earlier, the stuff with Sir Crocodile and Smoker and Tashigi, the stuff with posturing things to make Tom the enemy, same sort of sentiment here. The demons of Ohara, there's much more to this than meets the eye, and Robin's reaction right here, her huge emotional reaction, shows that. And the reason I think the government is behind this is because she quite literally says that. She says the government totally destroyed her life. So he asks, why work with them then? And she says, because there's a wish I want to be granted, even if it means throwing everything away. And the government can help her with that. And so that is why she has to do all these things with CP9 against her will. And it's dropped there. It was clear before that it was against her will. She didn't want to do this, but here she finally admits it. She had to obey the world government, and she had to pin these deeds on the Straw Hats, and those were two conditions. And she also had to help them finish their mission to get the blueprints as well, obviously. And so she's asked by Iceberg why she would do that, and she says, because there's something called a Buster Call. Now this is when 5 vice admirals and 10 warships go against something due to this call. So in this case, they would go against the Straw Hats. If the CP9 asked for this to happen, this would happen. They would go against the Straw Hats, and as long as Admiral Aokiji greenlights it, they will be able to totally destroy them. So the Straw Hats are at extreme risk for being annihilated. And then she says something very, very emotional, which is, I think, the core of her character in a lot of ways. She says she had escaped this place, I guess Ohara, for 20 years and done so well in surviving because she had nothing to protect. She just had to live for herself. But this is no longer the case, which means that she is okay with sacrificing herself. The thing that she had protected, the one thing, she was able to keep her life because she had nothing to protect. Now she has something to protect, so she discards her life. And that thing to protect is the Straw Hats. She is exchanging her life to save the Straw Hats from the Buster Call. That is it. That's what she's doing. And that's been clear. That's been something that I've thought was the case for a while, but to hear her say it is so gratifying. Now, Iceberg says doing this would likely lead to the Pluton being taken and the world being in danger. And she just says, I don't care. I don't really care. And how can you blame her? The first people who have shown this kindness to her in 20 years, maybe more. The first people who accepted her as family, that she took extreme joy in being a part of this family for. Though she wasn't totally a part of it for reasons we're seeing now, she kind of shielded herself a little bit from it, maybe. I think in a way that coalesces with her kind of death wish at the end of giving up hope for the poneglyphs. I think all that's correlated, but nonetheless, these people who have shown such kindness to her, of course, she would give up her life for them, given how she's lived. And not caring about the politics of this situation, not really caring about the fate of the world. How human is that, given her situation? And how Luffy is that, right? Luffy throughout the story has just been trying to save his friends, been trying to help his friends and the people he cares about, without really caring about the politics of Skypiea, for example, or the politics of what's going on in Arlong Park. He just wants to save people. He just wants to help them. And that's what Robin is doing here. Now Nami hears this and she just collapses in relief, saying, thank goodness she didn't betray us. Thank goodness we were right to trust in her. And so she's so excited and she goes to run off and help her. And she's elated. She's so empowered knowing that as long as Robin is with us, as long as she wants to be with us and cares about us and values us as much as we value her, things will be okay. We can salvage this. She becomes stronger through this empowerment, power of friendship done in the best way possible. And it's very true to life, right? How many times do you feel down in the dumps or really upset about something, and then some really good news comes along, or something just changes your spirits for the better, and you feel like you can take on the world, whereas before you were just exhausted? That's really similar to this. We then cut to the station, where Robin is boarding the train to get to Ennie's lobby after giving herself over for the sake of the Straw Hats, and we see that Sanji is waiting right there, waiting for her. Robin gets on board and Corgi's waiting for her, and Sanji sees all of this and he says, alright, gotcha. I knew this would be the case. So he never stopped believing in her. Now, he says a line here which is that real men can forgive the lies that women tell. To be honest, that line's a bit of a miss with me. I'm not really a fan of that. Real men forgive the lies women tell. I don't know. It's fine. It's fine. It's not like a huge goat moment like some of the other moments throughout, or lines throughout the series have been. I do know a few people quite like this line. For me, it's just like, it kind of misses the mark a little bit. I don't believe that there's anything that needs to be forgiven, for instance, from Robin's point of view. I don't really like the line of real men, and I do just find it a little bit silly, if I'm being honest. It was just a little bit of a miss with me. It didn't really hit. But it wasn't a flaw or anything, it just wasn't a huge positive. It was just whatever. But what I really like about this is that Sanji never stopped giving up on faith in Robin. He always knew that she would be loyal to them, or that she was who she was. And that's very similar to how he never gave up on Nami in Arlong Park. You know, Sanji does his simping, and I don't always like the simping. I know a lot of people don't either. Most people, I think, will agree, not everyone, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I think most would agree that it's not executed in the best way. It can get silly, it can break tone sometimes, it just can be overbearing. And that's just my opinion on it. But nonetheless, I would be amiss if I didn't give respect and kudos to the writing of his character for this loyalty he has in his crewmates, and these two women in particular. He never stopped believing in them, and he was rewarded in both cases. I assume he will be rewarded in the end for Robin. So I really like this for Sanji. He never doubted. Sanji was perhaps the most confident, and I really like that. So Robin leaves with Corgi. It's dwelt upon, why are you leaving? Why are you doing this deal? We know this. And then Sanji sees Frankie and Usopp as well being taken in by CP9. So happy little coincidence there. We have half the Straw Hats there. Frankie's a Straw Hat. But then the train departs, and Nami tells Chopper about what she learns, and Chopper has a very similar reaction to Nami, just feeling so empowered and joyous that Robin still likes them, appreciates them, is loyal to them, and is doing this for them, and cares for them. So it's go time. They need to stop Robin and get her off the train, and they have half an hour. And they enlist the whole town's help. The crowd, who is so easily swayed, starts helping, and they're looking for Luffy and Zoro at the same time, and they're also trying to find Robin to stop her. Iceberg is giving info, Polly's helping as well. It's very collaborative and very, just generally very nice that they come together like this, and very empowering in a way, that they all put aside their differences to try to do this. It's a nice tone shift from the dark and dreary tone known from the previous stuff. It's this race against time. It's very dramatic. The storm is very palpable. You can see rain everywhere, the waves, the tides. It's very atmospheric and very well done. And like I said, the crowd helps the Straw Hats, partly because they just see what happens, and also Paulie just vouches for them. He says, you can trust them, so help them. And the train starts departing, and Sanji sees Robin on it, and at the same time, we also see that Luffy is somehow stuck between two buildings. Luffy is stuck between two buildings in this narrow passageway, and Zoro is in a chimney somehow. Nice little bit of humor there. And the train is leaving in earnest, and Lucci says that he's been here for 5 years, but he doesn't regret at all leaving this island. He's not going to miss it, which again keys you into how cold he is, how cold CP9 is, how straight-laced and for the duty they are. There's no sentiment here at all. And we get a bit of internalization, non-verbal internalization with Robin, where she has a bit of a sentimental look on her face as she reflects on the time she's had with the Straw Hats, and it's so deeply sad. Her doing it for them, but giving up on potentially more beautiful memories with them for them, it's just so selfless. And, you know, in this moment, I'm quite sure that Robin is going to be saved and join the crew, and it's going to be awesome. But in this moment, you just yearn so much for her to be reunited now, and not be going through this pain. But at the same time, I love for the story that she's going through this pain because it's so powerful. And she has this sad smile and she covers her eyes as she thinks about this. It's just really well presented. And Nami is screaming for Robin. Chopper is looking for Robin and Zoro and Luffy. The rain pounds down. The crowd looks for them. Paulie. Everything. It's so dramatic. And then the train departs as Nami was rushing to it, but it's gone, and she's just alone in the station. Paulie walks up to her, and it looks for a second like she's gonna start crying, or that she'll be dispirited, but then she just gets wound up and angry and goes, like hell will I let that thing go. And Paulie's shocked, and it's beautiful, because Nami here is persevering and shown a backbone here. She's able to bounce back from this disappointment so quickly, and I love it. Who knows if 200 chapters ago she would have been able to do that. Here you see a bit of Luffy's strength of will that he's instilled in her, I think. She always had the potential for it, but she just needed that push and example, and I think this is a really nice example of showing how she's progressed very subtly in an underlying way. She hasn't had a lot of huge, gigantic moments, but from Jaya up until now, Nami has developed in substantial ways. But she says, we need to follow them, we need a ship. And Paulie says, you can't do this, the Aqua Laguna is impossible to navigate. But, you know, he hasn't seen Nami navigate, is what was said in my chat, and I agree. But then Nami is told by some of the townsfolk that she has a message, and it was a message that's been graffitied onto a part of the station or a building or something. And it says, Nami, read this. If you're not Nami, don't read it, idiot. And that's clearly been written by one of the Straw Hats. I won't spoil who it is, but maybe you'll be able to put it together. It's a little bit subtle. But what's funny about this is the people actually didn't read it, because it says, if you're not Nami, don't read this, pointing down to a note. And it was unopened. They didn't actually read it, which is kind of adorable. And she reads it, and it's a love letter from Sanji, minus the PS. So the whole letter is a love letter, but the PS is the important info. And she's just reading it, and she just goes like, oh, okay, it's a love letter, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here it is. Just ignores it all. Queen. And the PS just says, I'm on board to Ennie's lobby. Robin's there, Usopp's there, Frankie's there. I think it also said that those two were there. I don't remember for sure, but nonetheless, the important thing was, I'm pursuing Robin to Ennie's lobby. I'm on board the train. This is a great use of Sanji simping. It's funny, it's in character, it doesn't take away from the tension of the moment, despite giving you a laugh. It gets things on board really quickly, and yeah, I like it for Nami, I like it for him. I think this is one of the more clever and funny uses of it. And this chapter was called PS, which is hilarious. And Nami's encouraged by this and says, okay, let's go. We'll get there eventually. We'll find a way and we'll all be together. And we'll get her back. So Sanji's inside the train, the sea train, and he starts fighting these government officials to make his way through the train to get to Robin. And he fights this huge guy named Jerry who's like gigantic. It's kind of a humorous fight. It doesn't take itself too seriously, which I think is good. It's a good tone for this part as things are becoming more and more empowering and optimistic and triumphant, to transition from the darker, more morbid, grim, gritty stuff from earlier on. So I think this tone, the tone of these chapters as Sanji fights his way through the train being more humorous is a good call. And so yeah, like I said before, the situation is laid out, and we have 4 Straw Hats outside of the train and 4 in it. You know, technically at the moment, Sanji's the only true official Straw Hat because Usopp is gone. he's coming back. Robin is gone, she's coming back. And Frankie is not yet a crewmate, apparently, but he's a crewmate. And then we have Chopper, Nami, Luffy, and Zoro outside of it. So things are really speeding up and ramping up for this grand showdown. But the tension continues on Water 7, and Kokodo points out in the midst of all this searching for Luffy and Zoro, that's their main goal now, to get these last two crewmates back, that the ocean has dried up. She's never seen a low tide like this, and the tide is about to come in, this huge Aqua Laguna wave, and right before it, Chimney points out to Nami that she saw someone in between two buildings, and Nami realizes it's Luffy, and Nami goes after him, despite the risk that's being run of Aqua Laguna just completely destroying everything. And this is Nami putting her own life at risk for the sake of her friend here. Her life. The development in this girl, I swear. Now at the same time, Chopper spots Zoro, and then Nami and Chopper at the same time are both risking life and limb to save their comrades, their friends, their nakama, their family. And Nami explains to Luffy all that she found out about Robin. And it was here where it really dawned on me, for Robin, this is another step. At first, she viewed her life as forfeit. She joined the crew and she told Luffy to take responsibility. Then, at the end of Skypiea, after realizing that there was more to the mystery of the poneglyphs, she decided, I do have something worth pursuing in this life. And now, another step, significant step, is that she views her life as worthwhile because she can trade it for her friends. Now, this isn't the final step because this is still far lower in her own estimations of herself than she should be. She should be able to just stand up proudly and say, my life is worth everything. I deserve it. I deserve this life. I deserve to exist, and I don't want to throw it away, and I want to experience more things with this beautiful family. That is the next step, and that is maybe the final step, or something close to it, and she's not quite there yet, but there is subtle progression and steps being made for her to finally live for herself. And Luffy, in hearing this, goes, so she was lying. She was lying. And Nami says yes, and he goes, I'm so glad. He is so relieved, showing that, yes, he was wondering. He wasn't completely confident. He was kind of fearing that maybe his judgment was wrong. There's emotions coming from him, from Nami. It's beautiful. And then we see this huge spread of Aqua Laguna coming in, and it's apocalyptic. And what I really like here is that in the past two arcs, well, Long Ring Land excluded, so apologies, Long Ring, Long Land, but there's been apocalyptic imagery shown from two perspectives. We kind of have the top-down lightning, storms, just kind of smiting lands and destroying and blowing up lands through NL's lightning. That was beautiful, beautifully dark apocalyptic illustrations and spreads and imagery. Here is something totally different, but yet equally impactful. Again, kind of apocalyptic, as this huge, gigantic, seemingly world-shattering wave comes in that could destroy everything. And it's here where, as it comes in, you see kind of the derelict buildings and the remnants of ages past, these mossy buildings that are usually submerged by water, but we see them in the low tide as the wave comes in. And it's very thematically integrative and cohesive here, as this city is built upon layers and layers of history, and if it had stagnated, it probably would have been done for. But you keep building on the history that was already established, like Tom did, like whoever these people who innovate in Water 7 did. It continues to exist and thrive. But the past is never forgotten. It is under the water, it is in the back of people's memories, but it is always present. And the future, the present, wouldn't be here without those foundations. So it's really nice integration of kind of those themes and the literal setting and how it looks. And Chopper goes to Zoro as well, and Luffy, empowered once again, given the motivation to be able to escape, knowing that there is hope there, that they can get to Robin, pushes the buildings apart with his own two hands, and Zoro completely destroys the chimney he's in, and both escape. And the four come together on this bridge, but then the tide properly comes in. Now Paulie, to rescue them, to save the day, comes in and saves them in the nick of time from the wave. The bridge crumbles and they get out there scot-free, or with their lives at least. Paulie is awesome. Now he explains that the tide is so gigantic here, if this happened every year, the city would be gone. Like, this is an unnaturally huge wave even for Aqua Laguna, and Kokodo is very relieved for them. It's very sweet. Now the situation is explained properly to Luffy and Zoro, and Luffy, as you would expect, says, let's go. We gotta go rescue them. Let's get a ship and go after them. Let's get a train. Let's do whatever we can. Luffy asks if there's another train they can take, and Paulie says no. The sea train is a one-of-a-kind built only by a master. And there's a nice, beautiful little sad touch as Kokodo takes a swig, thinking of Tom there. But then Luffy is determined and he says, okay, we need a ship then. But then he's advised by Polly, just wait it out, wait until the storm is gone, and then we can properly pursue them without all this risk. But then Nami says, this is urgent. If we do that, if we wait, will we be able to do what we want to do? Because I've heard of Enies Lobby. When people go through those gates, they don't come back. She mentions that it's the location of the Gates of Justice, that there's a courtroom there, and that if you pass through the courtroom, you reach the Gates of Justice. And this courtroom is a courtroom in name only. In actuality, it's controlled by the government, and anyone who reaches there is condemned regardless. There is no trial. There is no fairness. If you go there, you are going to be condemned. Just being present is a sentence. And then once you're condemned, you go through the courtroom and you reach these huge steel gates that are the Gates of Justice. You go through them and you never come back. And from there are two options. One, you can take a boat and you can go to the Navy headquarters. Or the much less desirable option, though the Navy headquarters are no picnic, I'm sure, you can go to this prison island. There are torture chambers and execution blocks and all manner of horrors. And the imagery here is the darkest, by far the darkest subject matter I've seen in One Piece. The horrible, macabre, grotesque visual imagery we see here is horrible. It reminded me a lot of the Conviction arc from Berserk, though without being as explicit, because Oda notably shadows out a lot of things, but is really smart in being in showing us implications of what's going on with them. So this is deeply dark stuff, but the actual visuals are not grotesque in content as much as implication. So just very smart in leaving the mind to fill in the details, which can actually be more effective in some ways. But this is the underwater prison Impel Down. If I said it was an island earlier, I did not mean that, or I misspoke. I think I might have said that. It is an underwater prison, Impel Down. Yeah, so Enies Lobby has no mercy for criminals. It just condemns them to Impel Down, where they're tortured and executed. And Robin has a bounty and she's heading there, so she is gonna go straight there. So time is of the essence. They need to get there quick. They need to chase after them. So the rush is on. They cannot wait till morning. That isn't an option. And that is what Robin subjected herself to. She is well aware of what will happen to herself when she does this, and she does it regardless. So it just puts another layer of emotion to it, sadness to it, of her connection to the crew to this. She's not just dying. She is very likely being tortured. And Polly says no pirate in their right mind would go to this place with the intent of rescuing a crewmate. They would be captured too. And Luffy just has this blank look in response, determined, simple. There is no choice for him here. It doesn't matter what the potential consequences are. He is going to succeed. He is going to take back his friends. And he's then asked, do you want to pick a fight with the heart of the world government? They're told to give up. The storm's here. You can't catch them. You're going to be captured. There's torture and there's death. So many reasons to give up, they're told. And Luffy is not moved by any of them. He doesn't give a shit. And he says, I don't care, we're gonna steal a ship, and we'll go. Our crewmate is waiting for us, get out of the way. And Polly says he'll take them on, trying to defend them from themselves, and assuming that they're kind of subjecting themselves to death, which is a nice little touch for Polly. You know, he antagonizes them, but it's for their own good by his perception, so I don't really think that there's much you can really fault him for here. He just isn't aware of the sheer force of will and world-moving will that these people have. But then Kokodo says only the sea train can ride out the Aqua Laguna, but it isn't here now. And then she says, come with me, I think I can do something for you. So we're left there, and then we cut to Spandam on the sea train. This is the best case scenario for him. He feels very lucky, he's very, he's very jubilant. Everything's going his way. He's captured these people with bounty, he's gotten his revenge, he's feeling great. But then meanwhile, Sanji continues to make his way through the train, he's destroying everyone, and he finally makes his way to Usopp and Frankie. There's some fun interactions between Frankie and Sanji, they're gonna be great as crewmates, I'm sure. And Usopp is very sheepish after what he did, which is very human, very endearing, and very Usopp. Then back with Kokodo, she gives them something called a Rocket Man, which is a runaway sea train to chase the sea train. This was not regulated, this was kind of kept a secret, and it's extremely fast, and they will wield it to catch up to the sea train. And then Iceberg comes along with Kokodo to make sure they're supported, and Luffy's very thankful about that. Nami comes back rushing with food, it's pretty funny, and I really like this scene for establishing this normalcy and mundanity to things. You know, it's back to the One Piece humor. which really makes you feel like the crew believe in themselves. They've been fractured, they've faced many difficulties in the beginning of this arc, but now things are heading in the right direction and they believe. Now the Frankie family wants to get their brother back, they want to get Frankie back, so they come to the crew and they tell them this. They want to protect and save their family, and despite their differences, Luffy can relate to that, and so he allows them on despite Nami's protests, and they go together. They're on the same boat, he feels a kinship with them, and no matter what, at the end of the day, right now in this moment, they're an asset, and they're not harmful to him, regardless of what was done in the past. You know, he might not like them, he might have resentment towards them, but in this moment, all that is gone. And that is very Luffy. Very much, I don't care about what happened to you in the past, I don't care about what you were like, right now this is how I judge you, and depending on how I judge you here is how I will react. And here he deems them as worth going on board with them. So they all set off for Eni's lobby, big triumphant feeling, everyone's determined, and they're gonna get back Robin, Sanji, Usopp, Frankie. And it feels like classic optimistic One Piece once again. It took a while, but we're back at this sort of idea, this sort of tone. And you can say this is the first real smile that Luffy kind of shows since his fight with Usopp. Now, Sodomu and Gamora, interestingly named Sea Bulls, or King Bulls, or whatever they're called, I forget, named after those two cities from the Bible that were destroyed due to being sinful? Something like that. Don't quote me, but I think that's what it is. Not sure if Sodomu and Gamora here will have any relevance to that other than just simple naming conventions, or if there's more to it, but I would assume it's just a throwaway reference. I don't think that they will represent the sins of mankind or anything like that. We'll see though. Anyways, them plus 50 Frankie family members attached to the sea train and they head out. Chimney and Gonbei are on board, and Kokoro, and then the Gali Law Company suddenly appear on board in a very humorous way. Lulu, Tilestone, and Polly's there too. And they want to get back due to the betrayal, so fair enough. And Luffy then has this great speech. He bands them all together and he says, we have this common enemy. Different motivations, but common enemy. And he essentially says, we come from different walks of life, but we together here are of the same mind, so let's do it. And this is the first time he's really gathered different factions together and banded them like this and been this sort of leader. And we've talked in the past about Luffy being the king of pirates and how he needs to be a genuine leader, not just of his crew, but in broader terms. And I think this is a little bit of a glimpse into how he could become a sort of actual king, at least in wartime maybe. During peacetime, we'll see. But yeah, a beautiful sort of allusion to a conquesting leader. And Vivi and Iceberg have both taught him the way to be with regards to this. And this, because this isn't something that he just came up with on his own. It's something he's learned through experience and making mistakes and being taught from people that are wiser than him in some ways. And it all integrates in this, so I think it's really lovely. But it's a great montage of all the people involved with this, and then Luffy just goes, let's go, let's do this. Now, on the Puffing Tom, we get introduced to someone named T-Bone, who's a Navy official, and he is a very peace-loving, gentle Navy official who is very sensitive and seems to be caring. A bit of a bizarre character for me, not quite sure what to make of him, but had some nice lines, some of which I will talk about here. But we get introduced to him here, interesting guy, and a bit more of an addition to the shades of gray nature of the Navy. You know, not everyone there is awful. This guy definitely isn't awful. He's definitely more in the Smoker Tashigi camp. And he has his own ideas of justice, and they just unfortunately happen to align with the ideas of the Navy's justice, which is much more heinous. And so he's informed that 2 prisoners have gone missing, that the ship is in disarray, or the train is in disarray, and so they start looking for Usopp, Sanji, and Frankie. And at the same time, they're on top of one of the carts, and they call Nami. Sanji's calling her, and Usopp and Frankie are being very chaotic in the back. It's great. Now, Nami is talking to Sanji on the phone, and at the same time, Luffy and Zoro and the others are pounding through waves as they continue to pursue the Puffing Tom. And it's just so stirring. Everyone is in this together, everyone's working together, so many hopes riding on this. It's just really moving in that way, and I love this sequence. There are huge celebrations, there's that classic One Piece optimism again, and it's great, and it'll fuel them to get everyone back together again. Again, powerful due to the sadness in contrast that was there before. This is why I said I needed some negativity in this story, some conflict, some discord. I needed something to bring about negative emotions so that the positive ones would hit harder. They are hitting harder now because of the darkness before, and I think they will continue to in the next chapters. Now, Sanji tells Luffy the situation, and Luffy says, tear everything apart to find Robin. And Sanji says, I won't hold back. Amazing, amazing little captain's orders moment. And I love that for Sanji, and I love that for Luffy. Great little exchange. And Usopp in this moment learns that what Robin's done for the whole crew, including him, because she didn't know that he had left or anything like that. So she did this for him included. Frankie is very moved, and he says he'll help, and Sanji continues to go forward, but Usopp feels like he's not worthy of doing it. He's ashamed. He feels bad for Robin, but he says he has no obligations, that he can't take on the enemy ahead of him. And it's understandable again, he's dug himself in this hole and he feels this inadequacy and shame. And the two leave him, and they're confronted by some enemies, but then someone immediately swoops in and saves them. And this person says that their name is SOGEKING, and they have an unusually long nose, and they seem to scream peak fiction to me. So Usopp dons this mask, dons this cape, dons the moniker of SOGEKING, Sniper King, to then swoop in and carry out these deeds that he wants to do as this brave warrior, as this kind of alter ego sort of thing. He's not fooling anyone. Everyone knows who it is. A constant meme in my chat and throughout the community, I'm sure, is, who is that, Usopp? Because of how obvious it is. Like, SOGEKING's a great character, too bad Usopp left, that sort of thing. Just because of how obvious it is. And Oda clearly made this obvious, but this is an unironically amazing moment as Usopp is able to embody all the brave warrior things he wants to embody and throw away that shame by just simply putting a mask on. And I think there are a lot of interesting psychological processes behind this, but we'll wait until maybe a future arc or the next arc, Enies Lobby, before making conclusions about that. But I love this moment so much for him to be able to act the way he wants to act, to be this hero that he always had the capacity for and has shown in the past, but compartmentalizes in a way. Maybe not. Either way, I love it. I love the moment he takes this responsibility and he swoops in and helps them and embraces this. He is shamed. He is ashamed of himself. He didn't lie about what he's saying before, but nonetheless, he needs to fight and do what's right and save Robin. Because that's who he is. He is someone who is brave, who will become a warrior of the sea, who is heartfelt and compassionate, and very much more, like as much as anyone else in the story, an embodiment of the pirate spirit and of the Straw Hat spirit. I was told immediately to hear the SOGEKING song. It is beautiful. It was an amazing stream moment, one of my favorite stream moments. Oh man, I can't believe this guy. And there's a lot of great humor with it as well, because he goes like, okay, once he swoops in, the enemies are taken care of, he goes, do you have any questions for me since we've never met before? The most natural thing to say to someone, right, when you first meet them. And Sanji just brushes him off, which is kind of adorable because they know who he is, obviously, but they don't want to hurt his feelings or burst this facade or burst this balloon or burst this bubble. You know, I think it's very respectful of him in a funny way, but also a very endearing way too. Luffy's group get ready to go onto the sea train. In the midst of this, Nami mentions upgrading the climate baton, and both her and Luffy get depressed thinking of Usopp. Lovely, but very sad moment at the same time. And so Luffy's group are doing that, and Sanji's group head towards Robin, to the front of the train. They detach some of the train cars, leaving tons of enemies behind them. T-Bone is among these enemies, notably, and then they make their way to the last 4 cars, and they find this man named Wanze. Disgusting man. Probably my least favorite character in all of One Piece, and I think you guys would know why. I don't know what Oda was thinking with this guy. This guy is repulsive, he is silly, he's not interesting, he's not engaging, you just want him off your screen, or off your panels, I guess. I guess I can't speak for anyone but myself, but that's how I felt. I just wanted this guy off my screen. He is gross, he's not interesting, there's nothing about him that I liked, and he actively grossed me out because of his power to make pasta come out of his nose and use that as a weapon? It's laid out to us that Robin is in car 1, CP9 is in car 2, Nero is in car 3, a guy named Nero, and Wanze is in 4, and that's where the Straw Hats are, or the trio. Now CP9 get word of the 3 coming, and they know that they're going to be going for Robin. And Lucci smiles very confidently and says they won't be able to get to her, so let's just focus on recapturing Frankie to get the blueprints. Wanze is doing their pasta in the nose shit. The fight is fine. The fight is pretty good. I will just straight up admit I didn't enjoy. It was my least enjoyable aspect of the entire arc, just because I was cringing because I found it very gross. But in the meantime, Frankie confronts Nero in car 3. I thought Nero, first glance, looked quite a bit like Mihawk. But he is named Sea Weasel Nero. He has whiskers and everything. And so those two continue to fight as Wanze and Sanji continue to fight, and Usopp, or SOGEKING, taps on Robin's window from the outside. And then she goes, "Long nose?" That's his occupation, I guess. And she immediately realizes that it's him through the SOGEKING veneer. And Usopp says, "Nice to meet you." He is adorable. "I'm here to save you." And he explains the situation to Robin, and she just says, "No, why would you do this? I said I'm set on leaving. I'm leaving for this reason. Don't screw with this." And you understand why she's upset and annoyed by this, and just doesn't want them to interfere, because she's doing it for them. And she thinks that if her plans are curtailed or they save her or something, the Buster Call will be enacted on them, or something will happen to them and they'll be killed, which is what she was actively trying to stop. So she tells them to not help her with that in mind. She's trying to help them, and trying to save her in her eyes puts that at jeopardy. And then Usopp tells her some amazing things. He says from their perspectives, the Straw Hats don't need to be worried about. You can lean on them. You don't have to hold these things in. You can tell them your worries, which is really similar to what Luffy taught Vivi in Alabasta, actually. Usopp taking after Luffy in telling her these things that are very necessary and that she needs to hear, I think. He says there's a place for you there. You don't have to run away. In the face of any amount of danger, they will back you up and you will face it together, and you don't have to give yourself up. You can be selfish here. You can embrace them. A lot of the things he says here, notably, can be used on himself, and how he shuts himself away from it, doesn't see his own worth, doesn't want to embrace them because he feels inadequate. He could take his own advice here, and that's why I think he knows that he is wrong in running away. Wrong for himself, wrong for the crew. It's just not him. This is a struggle he's going through, and ultimately it's one he's going to overcome through coming back, because he knows deep within, because he's verbalizing it to Robin, that this isn't him, that this isn't what he wants to do, that it's illogical. Through all the adventures they've seen thus far, it's proven to him, through experience, that this just doesn't make sense. Of course he has utility to the crew, of course they embrace him, of course he loves them and they love him back. Of course they don't dismiss him, of course they don't abandon him. But it's cool, there are two characters in a similar spot in this way, and Usopp verbalizing this is really, really profound. Robin continues to say the same things, she doesn't want to be saved, etc., because it's for them. And then Corgi comes in, unannounced, and Usopp quickly hides underneath Robin and sort of mimes his arms underneath hers and expresses himself, and it's a two-person little contraption there to hide Usopp underneath Robin. It's pretty adorable. And the Frankie and Sanji fights continue. Now, notably, something that I didn't talk about earlier about the runaway shark rocket man is that there are no brakes on this. That's why I can go so fast. So they see the remnants of the Puffing Tom, the carts that were cut off from Sanji and them, that were left behind in its wake, and they see them, and obviously it can't stop, so Luffy jumps ahead to see if there are any allies on board. There aren't, but it's funny, because he just jumps in the middle of these carts and goes, "Sanji, Usopp," he just calls for them. They don't call out, and then so he signals that there are no allies while he's being shot at, and then Luffy orders Zoro to cut the cart in half. There are no allies here, so just cut through it so they can continue. And he does, and it's amazing, very raw, awesome spread. And he doesn't cut a single person. I wonder how his mantra is doing, because that reminded me of a little bit of peace of mind that he may not have been able to have before. Maybe 300 chapters ago he wouldn't have been able to do this without cutting a single person. Or maybe that was just a coincidence. Either way. They continue ahead and they see a sliced up Sea King, and Zoro wonders who the hell did this. Zoro ties on his bandana, and then we see T-Bone chasing after the runaway sea train, crying almost, lamenting the lack of justice in the world and that he can't carry out his form of justice, and just crying, weeping, grieving about the horrors of the world. He says he'll protect the lives of the innocents, and Zoro eventually confronts him, seeing him as this master swordsman for what he did to the Sea King, and he says something really interesting, which is that, "I'm gonna do you a favor by not letting you live in dishonor for allowing this to happen." And this line makes it feel like T-Bone is, you know, like I said, probably a decent person in a horrible, horrible organization, but he's just in the way of the crew, and the crew will not stop at anything to retrieve their crewmate. And it makes me think, will Oda cover the idea in the future? Probably not here. I don't see that happening here much. But in the future, potentially, of the crew just being so dead set on saving someone in their crew or saving someone they care about at any cost. That's been something that's been emphasized. They do this at any cost, no matter what. Will Oda criticize that mentality? Will it lead to some sort of tragedy or sadness for other people that is then reframed and shown to criticize the crew for their recklessness in the future? I'm not sure, but it could be something very interesting. But yeah, the lines are a little blurred here, but it doesn't really matter. They need to get Robin cut and dried, that's how things are. And Zoro defeats him, cuts him down, and says, "I'm sure the burden of justice is heavy, but we have burdens of our own." Sorry, it's a little hot in here. Amazing line from Zoro. I adore it. And it shows an empathy for him as well, an empathy for T-Bone. But nonetheless, this is just how things are. We have our goals, we have our Nakama, we need to save them, we need to continue. And so they continue forward, and Eni's lobby is stated to be 20 minutes away. The fights continue. Frankie does this bizarre centaur transformation move where he duplicates the lower half of his body. I'm looking at it right now. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in anything. But he said, you know, "You may be wondering what I'm doing, but save the criticisms for later." You got it, Frankie. I'll save the criticisms for later. But it's bizarre. He is doing some weird centaur shit with the bottom half of his body. But hey, I'll let him cook. And then the Sanji-Wanze fight gets pretty bizarre as well. Sanji beats him into becoming this pretty man. He changes his appearance, and then he goes back to normal, and then Sanji just defeats him. Good riddance. Sanji going way up the character ranking for doing that for me. Thank you very much, sir. So just one thing, I'm going through this part of the video during editing, and I do want to talk a little bit more about this fight, just for a minute or two, because, you know, while I do find Wanze disgusting, I do think there are important elements to this fight that I didn't talk about here. Firstly, I think I mentioned that he has pasta coming out of his nose. No, I'm pretty sure that's ramen, if we're thinking about the culture at play here. Probably ramen. But secondly, there's some really good stuff for Sanji in this fight, where he looks at the way that Wanze generally conducts himself and the way he, like, uses his cooking and mixes it with fighting and kind of disrespects the art of it. And Sanji can't really stand that. He antithesizes that. There's a great line he has where he says, "First, you called yourself a cook in front of me despite how he acts and how he seems to be blasphemous to the art. And then second, he says, you wasted food." He wasted food, which we know, with regards to Sanji, that is one of the biggest crimes anyone can commit, going all the way back to Baratie. So really nice callback there. And then he says, "Third, you insulted our crewmate," which is obviously very important to Sanji. So that's sort of his declaration of war and why he needs to take him down and why he's saying that you are antithetical to everything that I am. And I think that's really good for Sanji. I think that was a really important moment for him, and kind of a recap of where we've been with him, where he comes from. Again, some really cool stuff with regards to food and the nature of food and not wasting it. So yeah, I think this is a great show of resolve from Sanji, and I really liked this aspect of the fight. And I didn't talk about this in the original recording and just kind of cringed at Wanze being gross with his nose, and I think the fight deserved a little more than that. So apologies about that, but I did want to draw attention to it even in this addendum. But then he kicks Wanze into the next car. It goes forward all the way through to the CP9 car, car 2. And CP9 are waiting, and Sanji confronts them directly. Super courageous, super confident, super raw from Sanji, so determined. Now at the same time, Frankie and Nero are fighting. Nero seems to have the upper hand, but ultimately, it was a good thing I saved my criticisms because Frankie overpowers him and defeats him. Then he joins Sanji and CP9. And CP9 notices Nero, this person who's supposed to be a new member of CP9. They don't know much about him, but they say, this is a prospective new member. Corgi appointed him, and they don't know anything about him, but they say, this is him, I guess. And he's slowly getting to his feet, and then Lucci, cold as hell, explains that Nero is way too weak because he only knows 4 of the 6 forms. He's a work in progress, and they only care about finished products. And he essentially mortally wounds him after this, and he tells Khalifa, tell the boss that we couldn't use him. He was useless. He was too weak. So cold. And then Sanji notes this, and he says, these guys are justice. These cruel-ass customers are justice. They're enforcing it. Interesting. And then Lucci explains and exposits a little bit, saying that it's worthless to try to save Robin. He says that the reason that she had a bounty at such a young age was because of the fact that she had the ability to awaken these ancient powers, these ancient weapons, reading the poneglyphs, the same sort of thing, which is why she wasn't allowed to live, because she had the capacity to unlock this gigantic power. Again, inherent power in the hands of it doesn't matter who must be snuffed out because of the potential, or it must be wielded by us because we don't want to be threatened by someone else who has it. So there are nuances to this theme. The government wants it for themselves because they want power and they don't want to be threatened by others. Then there are people like Iceberg who thinks that it just shouldn't exist. But either way, it's the same sort of theme. And they're antagonistic because they say it should not be wielded by anyone. Except us. Frankie, kind of on the opposite side of things, because of what Tom said, which was starkly on the opposite side of things. And I imagine the crew and the story overall will ultimately conclude that as well, with regards to Robin, and with regards to maybe Frankie's ideals as well. And Sanji is enraged by this, and so he starts attacking Lucci as Usopp emerges with Robin having defeated Corgi. Sanji is delighted to be reunited with her, and Frankie sees, oh, this is the girl from the Bounty. Okay, I guess he puts it together. Now Robin, who with Usopp had dispatched of Corgi, continues to say, don't save me, whatever. She kind of pushes him off. She just doesn't want help. But then really quickly, my goat, SOGEKING, throws this smoke star, smoke fills the car, and then they grab Robin and they get out of there. Frankie and Sanji celebrate, and I love the art. It's so over the top, so triumphant, and it's happy and a great moment. Now, despite this, Khalifa kind of uses her powers to keep them reined in and in range. And Sanji gives Usopp responsibility, knowing what this means to him, knowing, like, this is a vital thing you want to do, or you have to do here, and I'm trusting it to you, which is defend Robin. He calls him SOGEKING, and he says defend her. And once again, he validates him by providing him with this job. I think it's so great what Sanji does here, and shows a lot of emotional intelligence to provide him with this. And I think Usopp appreciates it. And he says, okay, defend Robin, which is an immense task, very important, which shows he also just genuinely trusts him, as we know, but then confronts CP9, which is hugely courageous once again. And CP9 say, as per our deal, we can't kill any Straw Hats. And at the same time, Robin incapacitates Usopp, who was tasked with that, to defend her, which, you know, if she wanted to, of course she'd be able to do that. She's stronger than Usopp. But, and she just reiterates her feeling she doesn't want to be saved. But she does. Of course she does. She's been screaming out since she was a young girl, I bet, that she wanted to be saved by someone, and the crew saved her, and she is trying to save them, and that's what she wants. It's not that she doesn't want to be saved, it's that she doesn't want the crew to be hurt, which requires her sacrificing herself. But if it comes down to it, of course she wants to be saved. She is screaming out to be saved. She has been for years. And the value in being saved is why she does this in the first place. And Frankie, who understands the situation and can't stand seeing Robin do this, essentially allows them to escape by cutting off his chance to escape and taking on CP9 himself. Very selfless. Man, great stuff for Frankie. And Sanji tries to convince Robin here. You know, we know the situation. We did it anyway. We want to save you. We're here for you. We'll cut off the Buster Call. All will be okay, and all of us will be happy and together. But then Blueno, using his door power, sneaks up on him and attacks him. And Usopp gets up and defends Robin to the last like Sanji asked him to. But Blueno is able to hold off both of them, and Robin is yelling, "Don't hurt them, don't hurt them." Heartbreaking stuff. And Blueno says, "They're leaving me no choice. They're defending you violently, so I have to defend myself." And then in the midst of this, in a heartbreaking scene, but still very beautiful, Usopp speaks up and says, "Robin, you're still hiding something, right?" And he's all bloody. And he says, "You can't leave a ship without a captain's permission." He's fighting so hard for her to find this place on the crew. He's really not genuinely left them in his heart. And interestingly enough, he himself got Luffy's permission when he left. So he followed that doctrine to an extent. But he wouldn't be saying these things if he didn't want the best for her, and he didn't know in his heart what the crew are like, and in my opinion, if he didn't truly still reside there. But then he says, "Have faith in Luffy." Amazing scene, and she's shocked at this, and maybe it spurs her to believe that she can believe a little bit more. And that sentiment lingers, but Blueno takes Robin. He takes her, and he gives us some really important information, as he says that the Buster Call has in the past destroyed an entire island, which left Robin as the only survivor at the age of 8. So we immediately see why she feels this way about the Buster Call, why it's so fearsome to her, why it strikes fear in her heart. Obviously, the power of it's obvious to anyone who just listens and understands anything about the details here. It's clear that this is a huge weapon, but for Robin, it hits even harder because of the experience she's had with it. Her home island was destroyed, and I imagine that home was O'Hara. And so the horrible memories that she endured as a result of these experiences are what causes her to be frozen and unable to act for herself. This fear traps her psychologically, and as much as she wants to believe in her friends, and as much as Usopp and Sanji and Luffy and everyone reach out to her to say, believe in us, don't worry about the Buster Call, we'll deal with it, her fear just traps her. And it's such a real, genuine, raw, psychological examination of someone who would have experienced that sort of trauma, and it makes sense. She wants so much to be able to have faith in them, and she does, but she can't oppose the Buster Call because of the trauma she's endured. This poor girl, she has no will to oppose it, is what Bluno says. And Sanji says, you knew this about her. And he says, of course. And Sanji says, is there no end to your depravity? Using her pain as this tool. It's so beautifully said from Sanji. It makes them even more heinous, it makes them even more villainous and unlikable and horrible to use Robin's trauma as this tool for their quote-unquote justice. And Bluno says that straight up. It's all for the sake of justice. He says they sympathize with her, but they have to do this. And it's crazy. You understand where they come from. Even if it's heinous, even if it's horrible, you understand where they come from. It's easy to understand. They don't believe that this sort of thing should exist, and they're following orders, of course, of people who don't believe it should exist and that they should wield it themselves. Now, understanding it doesn't mean that you're not condemning it for the methods by which they enact these philosophies. But it's understandable to see where they come from, which I think is really important for substantiating them as characters. You know, you abhor what they do, but it makes them great antagonists regardless. And it coalesces with these ideas of justice, these themes of justice. It's all just really good and integrative. The methods are the key here. It makes them deplorable. And in the end, I think their philosophy is founded on fundamentally flawed grounds. But it's the methods, the cold nature of what they do that makes them very, very antagonistic. Because we've seen people with different ideas and different philosophies come together in the past in One Piece, but these guys are just different. And so Robin and Bluno and Frankie and the rest of CP9 all go off, and Sanji and Usopp are separated from them. And Eni's lobby comes into sight, and they're about to land there. Things once again are quite grim, and this is described as the Nightless Island, as Usopp and Sanji are separated, and Luffy and Zoro, Nami, Chopper, everyone else, Frankie family, Kokodo, they all pursue it as well. Things are coming to a head, and they are going to meet at Eni's lobby. And that's where it ends. Like I said, things are not conclusive here. It's kind of a transition into another location, another direct arc, directly into an arc, I should say. And it doesn't really end with a conclusion. There are no Straw Hats celebrating as they go off to another island, you know? There's no huge togetherness at the end. They are working to try to get that togetherness once more, but they've not achieved it. So this is an end to an arc unlike any other. And like I've said before, I understand why people don't consider this to be an end to an arc. Like, I totally get it, because it just continues as they reach Eni's lobby. But nonetheless, lots of interesting theming. A lot of which I can't conclude just yet because of the reasons I've said before, but there's that idea of power, the ideas of justice, the ways in which that's encapsulated in Frankie's backstory, Robin's character, the backstory that's been hinted at for her, CP9, great thematic antitheses to this idea, and just the overall ideas that are associated with Usopp and Robin and embracing and having the self-worth to ingratiate themselves back into it, and how Frankie kind of opposes them in a really lovely way. Lots of great stuff for Sanji, lots of great stuff for Usopp and Robin, all the Straw Hats basically, but I think Sanji has been subtly, like, not the MVP, but one of the better Straw Hats throughout this arc. I'm pretty impressed with a lot of the stuff that's been associated with him, but every member has their moment. Frankie obviously elevated a ton from the beginning, from part 1 of this Water 7 review, and he's definitely become a character I like quite a bit, and Lucci is obviously a star. The whole antagonistic CP9 cast, Spandam is deceptively interesting as well, and quite genuine and rich, and Tom was a great flashback character too. Iceberg, I really like Iceberg. Polly is great. Kokodo's quite good, quite solid. But if I had to give 2 MVPs for this arc, they would be Robin and Usopp. Luffy is pretty close up there too, through all the things he had to deal with throughout this arc. But we'll do the character rankings in a second, and things have changed. Also, a couple of themes I just want to quickly mention as well that I've, just to sum up, the idea of pride, integrated with that idea of inherent power and intent and all that stuff, as introduced by Tom. And then also the burden of being a leadership, that thematic through line continues into part 2 of Water 7 here, as Luffy takes on the responsibility and unites all these people together, and trudges forward, but is not reckless, and is determined but mature enough to gather these people together for this common cause and take into account all that he's learned. Luffy has some great stuff this arc as well. Now for my top 15 characters once again. There have been a few changes for the end of Water 7. My honorable mentions right now are Sir Crocodile, Koza, Polly, Kalgara, Zeph, and Iceberg. So we got a couple of new additions in there in Polly and Iceberg. Two great characters. Now there's one more honorable mention, but he feels a bit separate than the rest of them, so I want to mention him specifically. If you want to give him a number 16, you could do that, and that is Lucci. Like I said, he is very rich, great antithetically, a great threat in a bunch of different ways, very antithetical thematically. He's just overall super solid, and a great central antagonist for Water 7 and beyond, I assume. But Lucci would be number 16, or the highest honorable mention. Then number 15 would be Mihawk, who is just about hanging on to the top 15. That moment with Zoro, that battle with Zoro was just so otherworldly. It just about puts him ahead of Lucci for now. Then number 14 would be Hiruluk. Number 13 would be Frankie. He goes into the top 15. I like him a lot. I think he also has upward momentum. Lucci and him both have upward momentum. But as of right now, 13 seems the right spot for him. I don't think I quite like him better than number 12, who is Shanks. Just a tiny bit more. I like Shanks a tiny bit more. Then number 11 is Noland, who's still a central, amazing character to Skypiea and the whole series, I think. Number 10 is Chopper, and my evaluation of the character did go up through this arc for Chopper. He had some really cool moments and some nice stuff, but he went down in ranking because the more I reflect on my number 9, the more I appreciate him. Wiper is number 9, the best new character for Skypiea, and an amazing addition to the cast. From what I've seen, he seems to be quite underrated. I think people tend to underrate him, from what I've seen. Very limited exposure, so take that with a grain of salt. But I'm his biggest fan. I think the more I reflect on his role thematically, the more I reflect on his moments, he does so much. He's so just badass, legendary, emotional. He does so much for Skypiea. Skypiea wouldn't function the same without him. Wiper is amazing. I love him. Smoker is number 8. I want him to come back into the story. I think it's about time for him to come back in the next, maybe not the next arc, but maybe the next couple. But he's number 8 still. Still a huge fan of his. I just want him back. Number 7 is Sanji. Like I said, he has some great stuff this arc and definitely improved him to me as a character. Some really, really good, not overwhelmingly amazing, loud moments, but really good subtle stuff, specifically for Luffy versus Usopp. He was a great mediator there in a lot of ways, or Zoro was a mediator in one way. He was sort of the more emotional mediator. He had some great stuff on the train, some cool stuff with his faith in Robin. Really good stuff throughout for Sanji. Number 6 is Robin, with a big jump up. Now, she is obviously one of my favorite characters now into my top 6. She has a ton of upward momentum even still. I imagine the next arc will get into some very meaty Robin stuff, and I can't wait for that, and honestly, sky's the limit for her, depending on how good that is. Zoro is number 5. Like I said, he plays a great subtle role here, a great pillar of support in a lot of ways. Nami, whose progression has been great, like I've said, is number 4, just about. And number 3 is Vivi, who is just hanging on to that spot. I think this is the last time she'll be number 3, so enjoy it while it lasts because, Nami, Zoro, Robin, Sanji, I see a lot of upward momentum for them, and I think this is the last time she'll be number 3. Not because of anything against her, but just the cast keeps getting better and better, and she just hasn't been there. And number 2 might surprise some people, might not surprise others. Despite how much great stuff he had this arc, and how much he improved as a character even still, Luffy is my number 2, and Usopp is now my favorite character in One Piece. What this arc did for him was unbelievable, beyond my wildest dreams, and somehow exactly what I wanted. And he is now my favorite character in the story. I'm sure some of you saw that coming. You guys must have been chuckling when you saw how much I liked him in Syrup Village waiting for this moment, and I hope it continues, because there is still tons to be done with Usopp's character, and I can't wait. But yeah, that's my rankings. It should be listed on the screen right now, just for convenience. Someone mentioned that before, that I should list them on the screen. Great idea. So here you go, that's my top 15. And that's all I gotta say about this arc. I cannot wait to get into the meat of Enies Lobby as this romp continues. It just gets more and more and more hype, more and more substantial, and like I said, you guys weren't lying when you were saying this is one of the highlights of the series. This is excellent stuff. Oh yeah, I guess I forgot. Water 7, definitely a top 2 arc. In terms of score, I would give it a solid 9, at least. I have to reflect on it a bit more. I might give you guys updates later, but I think you can't properly judge Water 7 completely until you see what it leads into in Enies Lobby, when you can retrospectively look back on it and say, wow, look at all that it did. Because it isn't really a comprehensive arc in and of itself, but it's at least top 2 for what it achieves, for the emotions it got out of me, for the amazing, amazing material throughout. Let's have it second place right now. Skypiea is still number 1, but with, like I said, for a lot of the characters, upward momentum. Solid 9, my second favorite arc so far, with the potential of future material making it my favorite. We'll see. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me. Again, I've had a blast talking about this arc. I hope you guys have had a blast watching me talk about this arc. It was amazing. If you would like to watch Enies Lobby, my review of Enies Lobby right now, early access for it is on Patreon, if you're interested in that. You can check out my Discord to join in the community. You can check out my Twitter to stay up to date with my stream schedules, and sometimes I tweet about One Piece and all sorts of other stuff as well. And if you're interested in reading along with me or seeing my experience with the series as I read every chapter live of One Piece, you can follow my Twitch, where we do that weekly. Thank you so much for joining me, many thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.